So this is Misinformation and Disinformation, How to Spot Fake News. I'm Justin Fuhrer. I work at the University of Manitoba Libraries as a science librarian. So today, there's three main goals. First, you'll learn what misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and propaganda is and how it's used. We'll also identify different information sources that contain these things. And then we'll cover a little bit on how to appraise and evaluate information sources to identify misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So this is the outline we'll follow today. So we'll look at different types of fake news. We'll talk a bit about evaluating information, and then I'll talk about how these types of misinformation and malinformation, that sort of thing, can be found in academic research. And then I'll leave you with a number of resources that you can look into, depending on, if you want to read more about this type of thing, or also there's different tools and frameworks that you can use to evaluate and identify misinformation, that sort of thing. So this workshop's being recorded. No identifying information will be included in the final recording. So if you have a question, you can always feel free to raise your hand and unmute. I can edit that out of the recording, or you can just feel free to pop your question in the chat as well, whatever works for you. Please interrupt me. So if you have any questions. Okay, so this is a headline that you could find on NPR, National Public Radio in the United States. They published this on April 1st, 2014. It's just over 10 years ago, but April 1st, right? But the headline reads, "Why doesn't America read anymore?" And then the byline reads, "In an age of readily available information and countless ways to get it, we seem to be losing touch with our powers of comprehension." Okay, so when you click on that link was the only, that text was the only thing you could see before you clicked on the link. Again, it has the headline at the top, but then it has different text in there. Clearly, it was published on April Fool's Day, and NPR is just letting you know that a lot of people just read the headlines and then comment on the story without reading the actual body of the article or body of the text. And that's basically what they're identifying here. Okay, so this was published in 2016 by a news outlet called WTOE5 News. So the headline reads, "Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump for president, and releases statement." Okay, so this was largely debunked very early on after that story was published. So there's a couple of examples, one from the Associated Press, one from Snopes.com, which is a fact-checking site, especially for online information. And these were debunked, right? Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump. That didn't happen. Snopes.com labeled this satire, and I'll show you why in a second here. Okay, so how did this happen, right? So basically, you have a satirical news site. So that news site, WTOE5 News, reported, in quotation marks or apostrophes, that Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump ahead of the 2016 United States presidential election. And so they weren't publishing a true story. It's meant to be satirical. If you open that up, maybe that would have been known to you in kind of the same way that NPR article was, but it'd be a lot less obvious, right? And so people take this information, especially that headline, right? And they're sharing it on different news sites. So this one was shared widely on Facebook, and it was shared as if the article was true. So that's how this false information gets circulated. People are reading this, maybe the headline, not even going into the article, if they could even tell that it was written as satire, right? Because it's kind of removed from the context. All of a sudden, you're just encountering this kind of juicy headline on Facebook, and people are taking that to be true, or a certain percentage are taking this information as true and adding commentary to that original source in some way, whether that's on Facebook, whether that's in, real life conversations, that sort of thing. Okay, so just throughout the presentation, I want you to think about where you get your news, how you're consuming, reading news, listening to news, that sort of thing. And then why is it important to decide if the information you are hearing or reading is trustworthy? So there's different types of what you would call quote unquote fake news. So the first is misinformation. So this is false or inaccurate information, and it's getting the facts wrong. So the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity has a definition that says misinformation refers to false information that is not intended to cause harm. And so we have an example at the bottom there where a local ABC News affiliate has a story about Disney World, the amusement park, and how they're trying to lower the drinking age, lower than 21, which is found throughout the United States. And so they're reporting on this story, and it's the same sort of thing as that Pope endorsing the Donald Trump for the 2016 presidential election. So the story originated from a blog called Mousetrap News, and Mousetrap News is a satirical website about Disneyland, Disney World, Disney products of all kinds. But then, so they're publishing the story. It's satirical. It's not meant to be taken seriously. And then this ABC News affiliate picks up the story, presents it as true. So Mousetrap News originally wasn't meaning for that to be taken seriously, but it's removed from that context, put onto this news broadcast, and then they're presenting it as true. So it wasn't intended to be false or inaccurate information, but it is presented as such on the ABC local broadcast. That's misinformation. Then there's disinformation, and disinformation is different from misinformation because disinformation is intended to mislead or misstate facts, manipulate facts. So the APA defines disinformation as false information which is deliberately intended to mislead. And then the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, it refers to false information that's intended to manipulate, cause damage, or guide people, organizations, or countries in the wrong direction. And so you can think about the idea of deep fakes. So deep fakes is basically artificial intelligence being used to imitate someone else, right, and present it as true. And so this typically deepfake are used to mislead, deliberately mislead people. Okay, and then there's malinformation. So malinformation is also intended to mislead and cause harm, but it's based on true information. So Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity defines this as, quote, refers to information that stems from the truth, but is often exaggerated in a way that misleads and causes potential harm, end quote. So you can think about the idea of doxing. And so maybe you've heard that phrase before. That phrase or that term refers to taking someone's personal information and putting it online or circulating it widely. So this is true information, but it's intended to cause harm. So much like malinformation, whereas malinformation is false information, but both are intended to cause harm. Then you have propaganda, and propaganda has been written about endlessly. It's been around for a very long time. So Cambridge Dictionary defines this as, quote, information, ideas, opinions, or images, often only giving one part of an argument that are broadcast, published, or in some other way spread with the intention of influencing people's opinions, end quote. So you can see there's a couple examples of propaganda. I took these from warmuseum.ca. These are from the Second World War. And so they're intended to influence people's opinion about the war, right? Or access, or axis, the side of the axis, for axis versus allies. So think about countries like Germany, right? Okay, so going back to now with that, going back to Pope endorsing Trump. So the whole idea, right? There's a satirical article. They didn't even know who wrote it actually, and it's published on WTS news site. Actually, is part of a whole bunch of different satirical news sites. They publish tons of different articles, but this one gets picked up and shared widely on Facebook, right? And then the article shared, reshared. Other articles are published about this, and are reading this stuff and taking it as true. Actually, Hillary Clinton in 2016, or Hillary Clinton supporters actually used this as evidence that people that supported or were going to vote for Donald Trump could be fooled in this way. There's actually new research coming out that misinformation of this kind doesn't necessarily sway people one side or the other, but that reinforces existing perceptions, which can also be extremely troubling as well. So when you're thinking about misinformation, malinformation, the idea of bias comes into play pretty early on. So all news outlets, all information really is biased to some degree, right? We is pretty commonly held. These are just some examples talking about bias, right? The different ways that stories can be presented. So think about what type of article you're looking at. So when you talk about a news article, there's a huge range of different types. So one, I've just listed a couple here, but one, for example, is investigative. So an investigative news article is really looking at the background of a story, spent preparing the research and gathering the different information to piece an article together, really, dives deep into a certain story. Maybe it's part of a series and there's multiple articles that are coming out. These are typically rooted in, very sound primary source material of some kind, witness testimony, or documents of some kind, usually primary source documents. There's also things like analysis articles where someone's, examining an issue, or a team of reporters are examining an issue and they're analyzing it in some way. Again, evidence is going to feature pretty heavily on these. There's things like feature articles, which may fall into the analysis or investigative type. Then there's things like editorials. Editorials typically written by editor of a news agency or newspapers, that sort of thing. Again, these start to heavily have bias in them, right? But they're not pretending that it doesn't. So an editorial will be labeled as editorial, but know that typically it's one person or maybe a few people writing this thing and giving an opinion and kind of coming from the newspaper as a whole's point of view. Then there's also opinion articles, and these usually are maybe or maybe not associated with the actual newspaper, but they're publishing them. These are going to be very slanted as well, right? Because typically it's only coming from one person's point of view. They're offering a very particular perspective. And typically the evidence used in these, whether maybe there's not any evidence at all used in an opinion article compared to analysis or investigative. There's also review articles like the reviews of media, reviews of books, that sort of thing. This chart is extremely small. I'm just going to paste the link to it here. So you can click on that and look at the chart here. This is made by a company called Ad Fontes Media. This just gives an example. They outline their methodology, how they came up with this. It's actually being updated quite frequently. You can see it's updated January 2024. It contains web sources, podcasts, TV channels, that sort of thing. And it just gives you an idea of how biased a news source is, right? So you can look at that if you want. News also uses different techniques to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, have bias or sway people or that sort of thing. And this really comes through in the idea of framing. And I'm also going to just post the link here so you can read more about framing if you'd like, if you find that interesting. But framing is basically using facts in misleading ways. So you can see it's based on evidence. They're presenting facts, presenting evidence, but there's these different things that they can do to those facts to mislead. Again, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So things like decontextualizing or recontextualizing. So taking statistics that refer to one thing, removing it from the context, or taking statistics that refer to one thing and putting it in a different context that you don't necessarily refer to. Can be misleading, but the facts are quote unquote true, right? The other idea is cherry picking or limiting focus. So again, maybe you have some statistics, but you're only showing part of those. Or maybe it's part of a larger study and you're not referencing the rest of those statistics. It really can mislead people. Other thing is reinterpreting or pre-framing meaning of some kind. So you have statistics, right? Again, maybe they're part of a larger article or a larger research study of some kind. You're actually taking those and reinterpreting them. So you have study, you can read that with, expert analysis, hopefully of some kind, but the news media or whoever will be presenting these statistics are completely reinterpreting them. You can read more about each of these on that link, the consilienceproject.org. So this is an example, right? Okay, so you take, this is from the 2024 presidential election campaign before Joe Biden dropped out. And so first of all, you can see in this article, it's a news analysis. So it's an analysis piece. That's important to know. So it says, even the headline reads, even on Biden's big day, he's still in Trump's long shadow. And the byline reads, for the sitting president, even a triumphant ceremony to sign major domestic legislation can barely break through the nonstop attention on his predecessor. And if you have the slides, you can click that the James Fallow link. He runs a Substack page that examines things like this. Very interesting. But you can see, right? There's no reason to even bring Donald Trump into this at all. So they're framing it in a certain way. They're taking an event, right? Joe Biden signing major domestic legislation. And they're introducing this other context, which wasn't present, right? I'm sure Joe Biden didn't have to consult with Donald Trump, obviously. But he's taking this, they're taking this event and recontextualizing, adding context to it, which sometimes is important, but you can see how it really biases the analysis here. But they didn't have to introduce that at all. It probably had no impact on this legislation at all. So framing, it can be challenging to identify and disprove. It is often built upon verifiable facts. And so that's what makes it so difficult, because someone can, or pundits or, people talking about a certain article or series of articles, or maybe just the way the New York Times deals with things like presidential elections, can be really hard to identify that there's framing being used in this at all, because it's built on facts. Consilience Project says, quote, fact checking offers official verification and permits easier use of facts to mislead and misinform, quote. So they're saying that even if you fact check something that maybe one of the presidential nominees uses, or anyone really, and they can say, no, what I'm saying is actually true. But you're taking those true facts and you're placing them in a different context, or you're recontextualizing them, right? And it can really make it hard to, well, one, prove that it's false, because not really. But it really introduces this idea of bias into the information that you're reading. Okay, so after that, what should you do to spot malinformation, all these types of quote unquote fake news? So first of all, don't go down the rabbit hole. This is what Michael Caulfield says, who's quite a leading scholar in this area, fake news, misinformation, that sort of thing. So how to decide if your information is trustworthy? There's a quote from this New York Times article from 2021 that was written about Michael Caulfield. And he basically suggests if you know something's false, if you know something's fake, don't continue to engage with it. Move on, right? There's no point in trying to prove something's false if you already have this sense in your mind, or you're on a well-known, biased website, right? You just move on. You don't need to continue to examine it to determine something's false or not. So he's quoted as saying, we're taught that in order to protect ourselves from bad information, we need to deeply engage with the stuff that washes up. But really, he says, this strategy can backfire. So he suggests, instead of staying on that source, he recommends the use of this technique called lateral reading. And so this is the idea of leaving a source of information, just leave it, open up another tab if you're in a web browser, or consult a different information source to read more about whatever it is that you're looking at, to get a different perspective. Just leave it. Don't continue to engage with whatever it is, news site, TV broadcast, whatever it is. You can do basically other research from other information sources. So I'll walk you through that in a second. Okay, you can just throw your answer in the chat if you'd like, or you can just wait for me to respond. But true or false, a .org source is always a credible source. Okay, we have a bunch of falses. I did see one true. So this is actually false. So .org source can be, one measure of whether something is credible or not, but really anyone can register for these domain names. Okay, so lateral reading. This is more of the evaluation piece. So lateral reading, technique come up with, or that was developed by these two researchers, Weinberg and McGrew. So lateral reading means you're leaving the website you're on, you open a new tab. So this is talking about online, in an online context, and you're checking what trustworthy sources have to say. Can everyone see that image there? So basically you exit out of the website, you do a keyword search or some sort, you consult some other information source that you already know of, and you're checking multiple websites that have information on the same topic. And then you're taking that and you can actually start to get other perspectives. You can start to, evaluate whether that original source is trustworthy or not, or the information they're talking about. And so out of this idea of lateral reading, Michael Caulfield came up with something that he calls the SIFT method. And so SIFT stands for stop, investigate, find, and trace. So basically, stop, right? That's easy enough. So you've encountered something that let's say that Pope endorses Trump article, right? You're going to investigate the source itself. So you could just Google WTOE5 news. Probably one of the first things that comes up is that it's a satirical news site, right? And so you already have a better idea. Find better coverage, but it might not be that simple. So then find better coverage is talking about that lateral, the lateral move, right? And so you're looking at other information sources. This doesn't have to take super long time, right? Gathering more information. And then you can always trace it back to the original source. So you can find out also what that original source is using as their evidence or as their facts. Do I have a link? Yes, I do. Okay. So if you're interested in more in the SIFT method, you can read more. That's Michael Caulfield's blog, hapgood.us, and you can read more about SIFT. So stop. What do you want to know? What's your purpose? Right? So you found something that's false. What do you want to know? Well, you want to know whether, this is true or not, or at least get other perspectives on the topic. Investigate. You can use Google, you can use Wikipedia to look into the actual source of that information, the news organization, for example. And then find, that's using your lateral reading. You're finding alternative coverage on the same topic. And you typically want to use trusted news sources. So, something like the New York Times, trusted, right? Might have bias, but they're really not going to be putting out unverifiable information. And then you trace. So you can look at that original source. You can see what evidence they're using, open up those references they include. You can read context, for example. And so the goal of SIFT, this is from that New York Times article again from 2021, goal of SIFT isn't to be the arbiter of truth, right? But to instill a reflex that asks if something is worth one's time and attention and to turn away if not. So if you already know something's false or you have an idea, it's very clearly false, Michael Caulfield would say just move on. SIFT can be used for those more things that are more in gray areas to really research the verifiability of them. Okay, so true or false? I feel like we've done this already, but the best indicator of whether or not a website is credible is the domain name. What do you think about that? False. We're getting lots of falses. That's what I would say too, especially because the statement reads the best indicator. Best indicator. So it could be an indicator for sure whether a website's credible, but I wouldn't use it as the only thing, and I also wouldn't say it's the best. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about misleading academic research. Okay, so tracing. So the idea of tracing, the T and the SIFT, can also be used very effectively in scientific news stories. So have you ever read a news article of some kind, whether it's on like CBC or Reuters or something like that, or whether it's on like Nature or Scientific American, something like that, and you read an article that's talking about a study that's been done, new research that's come out. And so this is an example of one. Just pull it up here. You can click that if you want, but I'll walk you through the idea of tracing. And so basically, they're writing this article and they're switch to the other slide. They're using research that's just come out. Usually it's recent research that's come out, and they're using this to say why it's important and give more details. Maybe they've interviewed the lead researcher on the team or something like that to give more context, right? And so this is an example. Shortly before they collided, two black holes tangled space-time up into knots. So it's talking about this research that's come out by these scientists, and they give background to it, right, in February 2016. So it's like 5 years before this, or 4 years. And then they talk about a more recent study that's been done, right? And you can see even in this screenshot, look how many links there are that you can go to different places, right? So you can check these sources if you want, especially when you see that one that I put with the red arrow in a recent study. So you can click that, and then you'll be brought to different places. Sometimes it'll bring you back to the original, more of like an original news article that was released like prior to this other article. Sometimes that'll bring you to like a press release from the researchers or their institution. Sometimes it'll bring you to the actual article that they published, right? So it totally depends. Okay. Another thing you can do is you can take the names of the researchers, or maybe they even say the study, the article title, and then you can search for that in Google. So this one, for example, it had mentioned it was published in Nature, so I put in Nature. Then I put in some of these authors' names, and then it was the top hit on Google that pops up. Right? And then you get to the actual article. So this can be useful if you're looking at how something's been framed, how something's been reinterpreted, or just if you want to learn more about the original study that came out. It can be really nice. That's tracing. There's also direct links that take you to this study right at the top, right? In that recent study hyperlink. Okay, and the same idea with, oops, I was covering that. But the same idea with looking into academic research, and we'll talk more about misleading academic research in a second, but you use that tracing, the SIFT method, the T, in other media as well. So this, for example, came out in 2016, talking about Donald Trump's tweets. This is present on a conservative news site called Blaze. If you want to look at the original article, you can go in the slides. I hyperlinked it. But if you read the actual article, so the headline reads, Report U.S. Government Ethics Director approved controversial Trump tweets. And this is an example from Michael Caulfield that he highlighted. But if you go in here, they're actually, I forget what Michael Caulfield calls it. It's like re-reporting or reporting on reporting. So if you go into that article, you'll actually see that something called the Daily Dot reported this originally. Okay, and so they're not even doing, Blaze isn't even doing any original research into this or investigation or analysis into this. They're just taking what the Daily Dot reported. So you could actually Click on that reported hyperlink, and that'll bring you, I put the URL there, but that'll bring you to the original article that was reporting this or talking about this. Okay, so then once you go in there, you can see Daily Dot has a headline that reads, Government Ethics Director Ordered Controversial Tweets Praising Trump. Email reveals. And then you can look into what exactly this is all about, right? It gives you a number of hyperlinks, including one with a Freedom of Information request. So you can click on that, actually, the Freedom of Information request, and you'll be brought to the actual Freedom of Information request. And so you're tracing this research much like you would do with an academic article or academic news article. And you can be brought to their different pieces of evidence that they're using to report this. Okay, so true or false? Scholarly journal articles are always the best type of source to use. Okay, we got one false. Depends if they're reputable. That's a good point. Yeah. False. Okay, we got one true. I would say for something like this, um, again, well, I wrote this. Because I use the word always, okay, there's another true. Because I use the word always, then I would probably say this is actually false. But typically, scholarly journal articles, of course, they're great type of source to use. There's a lot of mechanisms in place that check and double check the information in there. But they're not always 100% accurate, right? You have to know that as well. But usually you can check the evidence that they used in some cases. But I guess well, one thing is that always, so they're not always the best type. Depends what you're using them for. And then there's no specification of what you're using them for. So maybe they wouldn't be the best type of source. If you're needing an eyewitness testimony on or statements on some kind of natural disaster or something, probably scholarly journal articles wouldn't be the best source to use. But I'm kind of picking hairs, splitting hairs. I'm kind of splitting hairs there, but all right, true or false? All articles published in a scholarly journal are scholarly sources. We got one false, we got two false, three false, four false. I would also say this is false. Not all articles in scholarly journals are scholarly sources. There's a lot of things like opinion articles or editorial articles that are thinking back to those types of news articles. Those types of things are in scholarly journals as well. Those aren't necessarily what you would call scholarly in the same way that something peer-reviewed would be. Okay, last one. If an article is written by a recognized scholar, it is a scholarly source. Couple falses, false, false, false. I would also say it's false. So the scholar, they might lend an air of credibility or authority to something, but it's not necessarily a scholarly source. It needs to be published kind of within the scholarly publication environment, really to be something to be considered scholarly. False. They are humans with opinions too. Very true. Okay, so scientific integrity basically gets at the idea about scholarly sources, also bringing up the idea of peer-reviewed articles. Are they all trustworthy? So no, I mean, generally speaking, yes, but factually speaking, no, not all peer-reviewed article authors can be considered trustworthy. So there's different things like selective bias, uh, neglected sample size, faulty correlations and causations, uh, create false statistics, and things like misleading graphs and framing as well that we talked about. So this is an example. This is from Retraction Watch just a couple of months ago. Superconductor researcher loses fifth paper. So looks like some of this guy's co-authors raised concerns about data, the article says, and another one of his articles that he published has been retracted by the journal. Yeah, you can click that hyperlink again to read more about that if you'd like. Just gonna paste, copy this here. Okay. Something called Retraction Watch is interesting. Retraction Watch, oh, it didn't copy. Here, I'll grab the link for you guys if you're at all interested. Retraction Watch keeps track of these things. So they do some investigation themselves. They also report on different retractions, reasons why people are having articles retracted. And you can actually look up, they keep a database of these things, a lot of interesting information on there. Just find it interesting, right? Gives you a really good example of why not every scholarly source is necessarily trustworthy at all, or all of them, right? Or maybe there's just pieces of evidence that are being reframed in different ways or misleading, that sort of thing. So this kind of thing can happen in academic research as well. Okay, so one example is this Wakefield article. And so the article was, and that is the article right there, the full title. But the article was originally published in 1998 and linked measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines to autism. Then it was retracted later on after that. So you can see these articles from 2010, 2011, right? It's talking about Wakefield's article. It's linking these vaccines to autism, right? And there was evidence that the data was falsified. And so journal, The Lancet, quite a very authoritative, one of the leading medical journals, it retracted this article 12 years later. You can read all about it on the Wikipedia page. So you can actually use Google Scholar to find the version of the article without the retraction notice on it. But this is a very famous article, especially like throughout the 2010s, and then even when it's during the COVID vaccine period, or it's still ongoing, really. This has come into the news again, right? It was around for a very long time, and it really propagated some incorrect information, which is since, right, the journal retracted it, but information's still out there. Yeah, so you can see how many different versions of this article all over the place. It's warns that it's been. Okay, so scientific integrity, there's all sorts of issues that can lead to right, research being incorrect. So pressure to publish due to tenure and prestige leads to inaccurate, incorrect, or plagiarized research, right? The idea of time, the idea of needing a quantity or a body of work to get ahead in your career can lead to this type of exploitation, really. Some examples are tortured phrases, and these are an interesting thing to look into. So a tortured phrase is an expression resulting from the use of a spin on a well-established scientific expression with a specific and fixed meaning. The reason I bring these up is ChatGPT and other generative AI platforms are very good at putting these into their generated text. So they'll refer to something like big data as colossal information. So you can see they're rewording big data, but big data means a specific thing. Big data is a commonly held phrase. Colossal information is not. Artificial intelligence can be seen as counterfeit consciousness. So you can see they're just using these synonyms, but like you're not going to refer to AI like that. Cloud computing is haze figuring, right? And you can start to see these phrases be integrated into different research, right? And if you see a phrase like that, especially one that's a really commonly held phrase, it's being inserted, and you recognize that, right? Might be a hint that the authors didn't actually write whatever it is they said they wrote. This section or these paragraphs, this would actually appeared in this journal, the European Chemical Bulletin. There's a link to it there. It's since been retracted. But when I looked at it, it was still published on their website. That was about a year ago. So here you can see that in the actual article, they're talking about their proposed methodology. And then they have the phrase, as an AI model, I don't have access to specific experimental results for throat cancer detection using the canning edge detector, right? With an A and N, and it continues. So you can see that they just copied and pasted generated text straight into their article. And this article was published. It's since been retracted, but it had been published. So what can you do, just to wrap up? What can you do about misinformation, propaganda, malinformation, bias, framing, on and on, right? There's three basic things that I would suggest that we talked a little bit about. This first one we didn't talk about, but I'll bring it up now. You can increase your online privacy. You can use ad blocking software in your browser. You can reject non-essential cookies. That's becoming more and more common to give you that. I believe it's law now, at least in Canada, to give you that option. You can verify privacy settings on your mobile device, on your computer, on your laptop, on your iPad, whatever it is. Second, don't waste time critically engaging clear, misdis, malinformation. So that's what Mike Caulfield had brought up. That's very important. Don't waste time. It's better to just leave it, go move on to something else. Don't even think about using lateral reading or SIFT or anything like that for clear misdis, malinformation. And finally, use your critical appraisal skills and evaluation frameworks. Understand facts, right? That just links to that Consilience Project article that I had linked earlier. And then utilize lateral reading and SIFT to get just better perspective, to fact check, might be, but to read things in a different way. So maybe you read that Biden-Trump article from the New York Times talking all about Trump, even though it really had nothing to do with him. You can consult other sources, right, to get better perspective on what exactly Joe Biden was doing a couple months ago. This is just little chart run by or made by one of the large library associations, international library associations. So you can think about, you can ask yourself some of these questions, considering the source. Some of this has to do with SIFT, checking the author, checking the date. Is it a joke? Is it from the satirical website, right? What are the supporting sources? Doing some of that finding, digging in or tracing, digging into the evidence used, that sort of thing. I will leave you with these links to some different fact-checking tools. So again, here, I'll just throw the slides up again, the slide link. So you have, you can click on there, get the slides. You can look at all of these hyperlinks if you'd like. These are just some fact-checking tools that you can use, right? So did the Pope really endorse Trump? Well, you can look into that. It might not be up there, if there's something very current. But you can use these things. You can check out media bias. You can fact check, that sort of thing. These are just some of the resources I consulted for this project or workshop, some of the works cited here. And if you want to read more, I made a bit of a bibliography that you can look into. And that's all from me. Thank you all for coming.